host of the Charter for Compassion's podcast, With Compassion, and we are recording tonight's session as our latest episode. We'll be exploring how compassion can help us respond to the most urgent challenges of our time, and in particular, how one city, Minneapolis in Minnesota, has responded to an extraordinary federal immigration deployment by ICE, and deployment is a polite way of putting it. In late 2025 and early 26, communities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and across Minnesota experienced a dramatic escalation in immigration enforcement during a federal operation known as Operation Metro Surge. Thousands of people were detained. Families were separated, schools and businesses closed, and many residents reported that basic constitutional protections were being ignored. The crisis reached a tragic turning point in January 2026 with the death of two US citizens, the killing of two US citizens, Renee Good, a Minneapolis mother, and Alex Pretty, an ICU nurse. Their murders sparked outrage and urgent questions about civil liberties, accountability, and the use of force. But alongside fear and grief, there's also extraordinary community mobilization. And that's what we're here to explore with an extraordinary panel who have been working on the front line with communities. So I'm incredibly honored to welcome Edwin Torres de Santiago, who is Managing Director of the Immigrant Defense Network, a statewide coalition coordinating rapid response and legal defense for immigrant families. Eric Brandt is the chair of the design department at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and is internationally recognized as the designer. And you were going to see some of his work shortly, and it will probably, no doubt, be familiar to you as well. Anne Halverson is a brand strategist and a mother. She also works at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And Marianne Bowe is a community weaver and grief companion who is also part of the Charter for Compassion's global healthcare sector team. Thank you so much, all of us, for being here. I wanted to start by asking you how you first became involved, and what was the moment when you realized something really bad was happening?
I think the moment for me is after the December break. ICE had been in our city, but it really started affecting me directly when my children's classmates and their families were not feeling safe to come to school. And so parents banded together and started organizing parents to stand around all of the schools in St. Paul. And
when you say they weren't safe to come to school, can you explain we have a global audience who may not quite be aware of what has actually been happening?
Sure, it does seem quite strange when you say it out of context. It seems very normal these days for us. So ICE was on the ground here, detaining people, all sorts of different people, profiling, racially profiling people, dragging people out of cars. And parents were really worried that either at bus stops or dropping their kids off at school, that there would be ICE agents. They're detaining them or their children. And it was a very, very valid fear. It happened. And neighbors, other parents from schools, and people that were loosely related to the schools came forward to say, we're not going to let that happen to people that attend our schools. So we're going to make sure that we stand outside the schools and watch for ICE and detract attention. So we were called observers. That was sort of the formal name for what we were doing. And right away, organizations that Edwin represents, like Copal and Monarch and a number of others that are now household names in Minneapolis, offered a number of training sessions. And we were on the ground, to this day. Right now, I just passed 5 minutes ago, anywhere from 6 to 8 parents around the perimeter of our school and the one adjoining ours, looking for any ICE agents or specific or suspicious vehicles, and making sure that kids and parents are safe at those sort of vulnerable moments. So that's when I say they were concerned for their safety. There has been and there remains a very real safety concern that if you are, and it's not just if you're not a citizen, but if you are Black, brown, and many other things, that you are at risk for being detained or arrested right now.
Edwin, we were told that ICE was being pulled out of Minneapolis. What has in fact happened?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, depending where you're tuning in. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you. I'm Edwin Torres de Santiago. I manage the Immigrant Defense Network, and it's so good to be in company with Eric and Ann and Marianne and many others to really highlight the way that our community stepped forward. I'll answer this question in two folds. I've been involved since I was a child. I immigrated to this country, to the United States, at the age of 8 from my beloved but war-torn country of El Salvador. And for the next 25 years, I was undocumented, without status. Growing up, my entire life was that rite of passage, right, of getting a driver's license, being able to go to college without any hurdles or ability to move between states. You really are brought up in a different type of system, a different type of environment, and a different type of reality. So for me, it wasn't when I got involved, it was more like how long has been this fight, immigration enforcement, and the crackdown and the criminalization of our communities for just the simple of not having status, which so many of us have tried and tried and tried and tried to adjust, but simply there's just no way to do that. What we saw for the last 90 days has been one of the most cruel abuse of power. And I'm actually joining from DC, where today, yes, we may celebrate that Kristi Noem has been fired as the Secretary of DHS. In her hand lies so many people that have died, including 2 of our beloved neighbors from our community, but also over 40 people that have died at the hands of ICE inside detention centers that go unnamed. And we had 3,000 agents in our communities, 3,000 agents, the largest enforcements to any American city. They've detained over 4,000 of our community. Now we have 2 deaths of our neighbors. And when federal agents announced a withdrawal, quote unquote, an end to the Metro Search operation, Metro Search, we still have over 600 agents in Minnesota. We manage one of the largest hotlines, and also our partners over at Monarca also manage a huge hotline. We're still getting dozens of calls for help. They may not be in the metro, they're now in rural places across the state of Minnesota. So I just want to make sure that that is aware for viewers and people that may believe that federal enforcement has ended. That's far from the truth. They're just being more tactical with how they're doing it.
And Eric, what about you? How did you come to become part of the resistance? We just need to unmute you. Not yet.
My apologies. Sorry for that. You think I'd have practiced at this after all these years? My involvement is actually rooted in my artwork and my stance that I share, and I have so much admiration for Edwin, and I was just almost brought to tears by your description of your experience here. My involvement started many years ago. I grew up in Germany. The guilt of World War II and World War I were put on my parents and my generation. But here in Minneapolis, years ago, my oldest daughter, who's now 15, was in a Spanish-speaking daycare center, which was really wonderful. This was under the Barack Obama administration, and ICE came in then and removed all of her favorite teachers and our favorite teachers. And I started making artwork about that back then. So it goes back some ways, and has perpetuated sadly through various administrations. But I think, and I'm sure my friends here will agree, that's precisely why they came to Minneapolis, because everything works here, and this is why these people are welcome. Why we are all welcome here. I'm not from here either. And that's precisely why they targeted us and came to create, to destroy what works so well here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And that is neighborhoods that truly support each other. And my neighborhood is in South Minneapolis and Powderhorn. It's always been a focus of strong political activity and support. So, it's just continuing now.
Edwin, what sort of on-the-ground support is needed, and what are you providing at the moment?
Thank you for that question. It's a very, very heavy question. Right now, the need is vast. The best way to describe what we're going through is right after a natural disaster, where you're assessing the damage. People are still in harm's way. People who were devastated and decimated are in detention centers. We have 4,000 people in detention centers all over the country that are picked up here from Minnesota. So even trying to locate them, find them, get them connected to an attorney has been the work that we've been doing nonstop. As well as, and I think, Angie brought this up too, it's not just people with no status. There is confusion that they're only getting the worst of the worst, or whatever that means, right? Because they get to decide what that means. They're getting regular people, and they're actually getting people with status, with legal status. So we are also helping people who the federal enforcement agencies are saying, oopsie, we made a mistake. We have to let Eric go. And Eric just walks out of a detention center in the middle of nowhere in El Paso, Texas, with no documentation. And we have to find a way for Eric to get back home. That's obviously an example. And Eric, that's not your experience, but it is real. Another thing that I have to bring up is rent. People need to be able to stay in their homes. We are seeing tens of thousands of families impacted because they took their breadwinners, whether that's the mom or the dad or the cousin or the uncle. They took people who were working. So that has ripple effects in the healthcare that they are able to receive, the lack of education. That's so many students have been so afraid to go to school because their parents are afraid to also take them to school. So not only are we looking at rent support, making sure that we are keeping our families inside and sheltered. Mind you, a few weeks ago, it was negative 30 degrees in Minnesota. This is not the time for have unhoused individuals in our beautiful state of Minnesota. Spring is coming, but that doesn't mean that we need to be unhousing people. So it's right now the biggest concern we have is feeding folks, keeping them in their homes, and getting people the legal support they need after going through detention centers. And I'm sure Mary Ann and Eric may also speak to many other things that are happening on the ground. But the number one thing we get called on the hotline is rent support.
And I know that you I think the expression is change track. You went from being part of the group of parents that were there to protect children and their parents at the school perimeter, and you've transitioned to providing a safe space. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, we talk about it as changing lanes because you are sort of either on the observer and protesting side, or you're on the mutual aid side. And that doesn't mean that everyone's doing that, but the idea is that if you are helping people or bringing groceries to families, you don't want anyone to follow you and expose those families. And so you try to keep the people that you're helping with aid safe by not participating on the protesting and observer side. So at some point in the middle of this, we had friends come to stay with us, and yes, I changed lanes at that point. And I'm happy to say that they have just this week returned to their homes, but that's not a luxury that many have. Their risk was in transit, and we happened to live close to where they worked, and so they were, they had to, everyone still has to pay the bills. Bills didn't stop for all these families when they had to shelter in place, and so they were one of the lucky ones. And that comment that Edwin made about rent, so many of our school families, as we are navigating mutual aid needs right now, do center around rent. Most of these families have been out of work for 3 months now, and middle of December for a lot of families, and they are really either behind on payments or seeing eviction notices. We have 2 families that with hearings coming up in the next 2 weeks, and Minnesota is well known for having great government support. However, those needs are immediate. So one thing that is really beautiful about the support that we have on the ground are all of these sort of organic GoFundMe neighborhood and school fundraising efforts that are kind of filling in where government aid can't reach it, or can't reach fast enough. So and those aid groups on the ground are talking to one another. So our aid group will liaise with another neighborhood aid group, and we'll try to cover a portion of someone's rent, and another aid group will cover the other portion, to make sure that they don't get evicted. And then we kind of move on to the next family that needs it. And then we deal with next month. And it's a very, very real need right now, especially right now, because I think the destruction of and the havoc that ICE created in our community, it was survival for the first couple of months. And now we're just sort of seeing the after effects, and it's hitting people in the pocketbook in a big, big way.
And Marianne, earlier Edwin said that it was in rural communities that we're now experiencing the presence and the brutality of ICE. You work in rural communities, and I wondered if you could say a bit about that.
Sure. My friends, like Anne said, people, friends my age that have never really been social activists are just on the front, all over. I have a friend who is a retired Spanish professor, and she works for and has been working for people who are seeking asylum. And she got told in the rural community that there was a man and his teenage daughter who had been evicted from their trailer, and he was now living in a trailer with 2 other babies and another family. And the water in the trailer court, the landlord, it's not drinkable and it smells. And so she drove up to this trailer, and she said, he was outside, and she said, "Can I help you?" And he said, no hablo inglés. And then she went off talking in Spanish, and she said the relief on his face. And so they have a system now where he texts her all the things they need, the diapers, the water, the groceries. She gets them, and then she comes to the trailer and texts him that he's there. He comes out and takes the things. She can't stay parked in front of there for long. And then she's also taken him to her home so that he knows that this is a safe house if he needs it. Just in another southern rural community, friends just told me last week that there's a Mexican restaurant that's closed. And a neighbor who lives right next door to the owners of this Mexican restaurant, for over a week, they've been trying to knock on the door. They will not come to the door, even for neighbors. So now they've started to leave notes and send messages of support, into the mailbox, just so they know. But it's pretty devastating. And it continues. And you all can speak more to this, but I'm understanding that ICE has now gone underground, so they're not wearing. They're incognito. So it's pretty scary. Things we're not done by any means.
Edwin, I wondered if you wanted to talk to that, and I know, Anne, you've also had experience of ICE no longer being clearly visible, but the knowledge that they are there and watching and surveying.
That's right, and I'll give you the floor too. I would just say what Marianne has brought up is real. It's something we've seen for a while. Before there was the Metro surge that started really in this right about Thanksgiving, and it just continued to escalate to the point where it became national and international news. But before then, federal agents were around the state of Minnesota, maybe about 200 or 300 or so, depending on the month. They would wear civilian clothing. And I don't know how else to describe it. And for partners and viewers here from other states in Minnesota, in the state of, in the region, whether it's the Midwest or even in states like Oregon that also had this, in California and Louisiana, they're wearing regular clothing. So it like, that is the scary, insidious, cruel, that we are just supposed to watch someone wear civilian clothing, assume they have a reason to kidnap someone, use force if they need to, and then we're just going to go on and keep on sipping our coffee. It's just not part of who we are. So that's what they're going back in. Operation Metro Surge was theater. And I want to make sure that it's clear. It was theater. The amount of times we saw camera crews follow ICE agents, we know that we'll probably end up in an ad somewhere for what they did and the tactics that they deployed in the state of Minnesota. But now they're going back to regular civilian clothing, using regular vehicles, stopping people, kidnapping them within 5 or 6 minutes. And it's not 40 agents at a time. It's maybe less than 4 at a time. Those are the actions that we've been seeing on the ground since the removal of for the last 2 weeks. And Anne, I don't know if you want to add to that, or anybody else.
Yeah, it was, I don't want to say it was easy to identify them during the 90-day sort of surge, but it was fairly, we had a system. You were on your Signal chats, you would type in a license plate, it was confirmed or denied whether that was ICE, and that felt, maybe it was or maybe it wasn't, but it felt relatively sort of correct in the reporting. Now, toward the end, they were sort of muddying up license plates. So they weren't using the rental license plates. They were actually, covering up, or you'd see tape on license plates, or you would hear, this is anecdotal, but you would hear use of them using license plates that were purchased in antique stores. And so you'd have cars that didn't look like they were rental cars or SUVs. and that's kind of how this sort of insidious, like you can't quite tell what's an ICE vehicle and what's not, started. And then I think it turned into, as the de-escalation progressed, you can't really tell who's an ICE agent or who's not. And so, at the school level, we're smarter. We've been doing this now for two months. And when I say we, not I, but I'm still plugged into into our observer parents, and they know all the cars, all the parent cars, and they know how to safely approach a vehicle, and they know what to look for, and we're really good at sharing information. So if there's a suspicious vehicle in the area, that picture is going to get shared with other districts, and we'll continue to follow and make sure that others are aware and track the actions, and just make sure that we're keeping everyone safe is really the goal.
So I'm hearing that there is an extraordinary network that has arisen really very quickly. How has that come about, and how have you managed to organize so effectively at scale in such a difficult environment?
I think I can speak to that a little bit. It's sad to say, but we really owe a lot of this ability to organize so quickly to George Floyd, and sadly his murder, because the systems and the communities that rose up after that happened re-engaged immediately, even prior to the murder of Rene Good and Alex Preti. So I think, that aside from the cold that these people had no experience with, and we did, they completely underestimated the commitment and the dedication of the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul to quite literally protecting their neighbors, and end up immediately when these things went so badly so quickly, as my colleagues here have explained so well. I think my children go to school here too. I've seen women like Anne escorting large numbers of people. It's quite a shocking sight in modern day America to witness these kinds of things, but it's also incredibly uplifting. My street is frequented by ambulances, and ICE figured this out very early in their operation, and they were using the street quite frequently, both to stage and to move in between places where they were going. So many people have experienced things like that here in this town, and we all got our whistles. We all started standing on street corners. We all started communicating, as Anne said, and we were ready to do so, sadly, for all the wrong reasons, because of what we had, gathered to do, especially during the riots after George Floyd was murdered.
And Eric, you mentioned the role of women. How big a part have women played in this resistance movement?
From my point of view, I think they've been at the very front. Organizations like Edwin's, organizations like Women's March Minnesota, which started in collaboration with COPOL, if I remember correctly, and Monica. The first large-scale demonstration, that was December 20th, if I remember correctly. Indivisible Twin Cities is also women-led. There's so many organizations and so many people unaffiliated with organizations that just inserted themselves and started helping, and started showing up on street corners, started escorting children, started gathering and buying groceries, started distributing them. And I think that's, again, it's so inspiring to see this, and it's just for all the wrong reasons that this has had to happen, but it's brought out the best in our community. And like I said before, I think that's precisely why they came after us, because they want to destroy that kind of community, and we're not going to let them.
And Eric, you mentioned there the marches, and of course your artwork has been a big feature of those marches, and I think you've got some images that maybe you could talk us through.
I'd be happy to, and maybe I'll just raise my hand to go to the next slide really quickly. So I created these Ice Out Minneapolis St. Paul signs. MSP stands for Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport. I was approached, you can go to the next slide. I was approached by a foundation here in Minneapolis that wanted, this is very early in December, almost just barely when the surge started. And they wanted to create communications around that people could use to express their opposition to ICE. And so they approached me about creating a viral campaign. And my idea was to focus on the yard sign because it's a very ubiquitous political tool here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a very democratic tool. People are very eager to express themselves this way. And it has a sentinel quality because it lives 24/7 saying what you think. And so Ice Out itself is a colloquialism in the north here. It actually refers to when ice leaves the lakes as the spring emerges from south to north. So it's a very common expression. So I focused on this immediately. Ironically, the foundation rejected it at first. They were looking for more of a logo mark, I found out. But later on, they came back to me and said, would you like to put this around? And they did. And they didn't tell me they were going to put it on Facebook, but they did. And it got a massive response there. So this is actually outside my house. The board in the back that you see, Ice Not Like Us, is a surface I've been using for years to create political messages and share artwork. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of that. This is from early in last year when I was trying to express all the outrage we were feeling following the inauguration of this last administration. And I imagined what happened, all these different protest signs. And so if you go to the next slide, this was predated, again, like I was talking about before, this was an installation I put up after the murder of George Floyd, which was preceded by the murder of Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, and many, many others. And so this is a public-facing exhibition that's there all the time, and it's constantly changing. So if you go to the next slide, it's just a detail and give you an impression of what it was like, as Edwin said, at 30 below. For those of you who think in terms of Celsius, there's a point where Fahrenheit and Celsius come together in some unbelievable way, and it was colder than that. So these signs started popping up all over the place. They were part of the first Women's March. If you go to the next slide, the foundation sponsored a printing about 400 of the yard signs, but many, many more of these smaller 11 by 17 handheld signs. So they started popping up after that. Women's March Minnesota, Indivisible, Twin Cities played a huge part in giving those out. They were all for free. I had donated the design. So this has become, along with many other signs, it's not just mine, it's become part of the landscape of Minneapolis and St. Paul and beyond. You can advance, please. So this is what it looks like outside many different houses, and you can click next too, please. The sign has been, I've given different files to people all over the world, especially all over the country. Using the 3-letter acronym for airports and states, etc., was advantageous because it can easily change it. So I've given this to people in Milan, Italy. I've given it to people in Canada coming up tomorrow. And it's also been used on large-scale installations. This is in downtown Minneapolis. You can go to the next slide. South Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, St. Paul, etc. We're all known for our eccentricities. So there are some smiles amidst everything that we're doing, that we're trying to do. But the unanimity around this is palpable. You feel like the whole town is with us. And together on this. And so if you go to the next slide, and I'll try to get my cat to not interrupt. What you can see here, and you can kind of click through the next slide sort of naturally every 5-10 seconds, is what we've experienced here over the last 2 months. People coming out in the most brutal conditions you can imagine, banding together, writing, making their own signs, developing their own messages, etc. But most importantly, standing together. This image is from the first Women's March. You can see in the background too what became very popular, the so-called rebel loon that emerged as a very popular message carrier. And what I love about these images is that here and there, you'll see, what I tried to contribute. So these have been, I've had people from all over the world share images from, these are images from the United States sharing images from their national news broadcast, where these and other signs, things that my colleagues have created, students have created, etc., from our school. And so these images, and looking at them now, they're actually quite joyous when you think about it. All these people in one voice, all together, refusing to be intimidated and coming together. But I can assure you, I have many former students who were too afraid to come to these, that stayed in their apartments, all these families. So I think that was, the Women's March was quite huge. The second march that started in Powderhorn was even bigger. And then, of course, the 100,000 plus that gathered in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis later. We all felt we had to go out and use our voices that other people couldn't use. And there's been an incredible coming together of people who would never associate with something like this to protest and to brave these conditions, but also to make sure that our voices were heard. That's
Eric, thank you so much. That is so powerful to see, and I'm noticing a lot of people in the chat are incredibly moved by what they've been hearing and what they've been seeing, and I do want to encourage people, if they have any questions for the panel, to please post them here. So I'm seeing there are many different ways to get involved. There's protests, there's the network of parents of school-aged children, there's legal rights, there's family sheltering in place. How do you coordinate between these different groups and make sure that there isn't duplication or I mean, how does it work on the ground? And I'm particularly interested because, of course, there will be other communities that want to learn from this.
Well, I'll take a stab, and I know that we have other panelists here who can speak it from this much better, maybe. But I will say you have to have a level of coordination across all the spectrum of service institutions, advocacy orgs, member-based organizations, labor. You still need institutional support when it comes to cities or counties. So we at the Immigrant Defense Network are part of a system-wide center that we just created. We created it with every leader mentioned here, from Indivisible to Women's March to, even groups like 5051, Monarca, Labor, AFL-CIO. These are large institutions. And we pretty much decided to meet regularly. The people managing.
And how did that come about? Did one person initiated it? What are the practicalities of establishing a network that big, that quickly?
I think we all respected each other in what we were doing and what we were, the members that we were bringing, the coalitions that we were organizing. And the fact is, Minnesota, it's so huge. I mean, it's actually really spread out. It's not one major city. You have 8 regional hubs. You have the Metro, you have St. Cloud, you have Moorhead, you have Duluth, you have Rochester, you have Mankato, and these are anchor cities. And then on top of that, you have smaller towns that are heavily populated, because you know what we produce? We're one of the largest producers of turkey and of poultry and agriculture. So we do get a lot of communities, migrant communities in very small rural places. One of the most diverse city by percentage is not Minneapolis. It's a small town called Worthington, where 54% of the entire population is people of color, in a town that is about less than an hour away from South Dakota. So like, these are like small rural places that have strong infrastructure with communities of color. And then we also have a lot of universities, a lot. So those anchor different types of energy and professors and students, right? So what we had to do was respect each other's leadership, number one. be led by immigrant voices, and then have so many allies and partners believe us, right? That was it. You have to have, if people most impacted are telling you how they need support or what we should do, believe them, right? And then come up with solutions to the problems, right? Looking at the problem was never going to get us anywhere. We knew we needed to train people. The number is all over the place, but I guarantee you the number is north of maybe 100,000 Minnesotans trained by any of the networks to be a constitutional observer. The Immigrant Defense Network right now, as of today, March 5th, we've trained a little under 33,000 Minnesotans. And that's one network. I guarantee you Monarca has trained another 40,000. I guarantee you Indivisible has trained people. I guarantee you 5051 and many other partners have trained their own people. So number one, we all came together because there was a crisis. And then we all got on a Signal chat and started adding people. And then we had to build a structure. Then we had to be like, okay, who is managing what? In places like Minnesota, you may not want to duplicate some tactics, but maybe you do. We have 87 counties. We had to duplicate the training. That was a must. There was no way that one group or one network could train tens of thousands of people. Our network was training about 3,000 people every single week.
And what were you training them in? What were the skills that you were giving people? What were the most important things that people had to learn? Because I know we've got questions in the chat about how do we do it in our community.
So we were training on, so our training is called the Constitutional Observer Training. It's actually, I'm happy to share that training with any partner that wants to be a trained trainer. That's what I'm actually here in DC to do as well. But to be a constitutional observer, you're trained to how to show up if you want to observe and document federal ICE activity as they're detaining someone. How are the legal protections you have as an observer? Because it is a constitutional right to observe any federal law enforcement activity. But we have protocols in place, meaning how do we do it so, if Eric is being detained, we are protecting Eric's identity, that we're not live streaming, that we tell Eric their constitutional rights to remain silent, to not sign over any documents, to be able to ask questions to federal agents about what are they doing? Do they have a warrant for this person's arrest? And correct me if I'm wrong, Eric or Ann or Marianne, I never in the 92 days ever saw a warrant. And I myself reported to over 60 different federal enforcement activities where I questioned federal ICE agents why they're stopping someone. Then we follow up. So let's say they take Eric, right? Which is, we're not superhuman. We know we're not going to be able to save every single person. We're the ones who then follow up to Eric to find them in the complex system of confusion that's called detention centers, because they are doing it by design. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but they will put Eric in a detention center and then within 3 hours ship him to a different state. And then they send Eric without even his right documentations. So like the amount of legal work that got to, even not even legal work, just straight up people searching and looking for the databases, when you have a flawed system, when the federal government in our federal country, federal level, had to create a database so we can look up people where they're at any given moment, because they were moved so many times from one detention center in Nebraska to then El Paso, then Louisiana, then Florida. So to answer that question, we all got together. We respected each other's leadership. We understood who was who was doing already the work on the ground, and who were the legal partners, who were the clergy, who were the labor, who were the member-based groups, who were the food shelf providers, who were the ones delivering food, who was going to be the one going to the court hearings for all of these individuals. And then we all had to agree that we were going to continue moving forward and continuing to share information across all the networks. That's the only way to do it. Not one person can do this. Not one institution can do this, because they started to, and when I say they, I mean the federal government will come after you. I was followed by ICE for an entire day. They showed up to my house. I began to receive threats by far right groups. My profile was featured on Tennessee Rising, which are like really far right groups. And what they want to do is find who is the leader. There was no leader here. It was hundreds of us doing this work. And when one hotline went down, the other one was running. When they were trying to pick one group apart, another group stepped up. And that's the only way that this worked. And I am so proud. And every time I share this, I'm so proud that in our state of Minnesota, they decided to care for people like me and decided to care for my family. My mom and dad were in hiding for 2.5 months. And for anyone who is watching, hiding is a form of resistance. And my parents were able to hide because people like Marianne and Eric and Ann showed up and believed us. That's the only way this happens. And I want to get that across. Believe your immigrant communities and believe us when we say we're under attack.
That's so deeply moving to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And you are in Washington right now. Can you tell us a bit about what you're planning to do there?
We're trying to keep this government accountable. There's a lot of hearings. Our governor had to testify yesterday. Governor Walz testified in front of Congress. Today, we know that President Trump has fired Secretary Noem for let's just say, the human right abuses that led to 2 of our neighbors to be publicly executed in front of dozens of people. That is the difference here, that our constitutional observers witness people be murdered. And that's not the first time it's happened in Minnesota. And thank you, Eric, for naming of the leaders that helped shape Minnesota after the killing of George Floyd. Because we would not be here ready and prepared with all the mutual aid and all of this group hadn't it been for what we all went through 6 years ago. So I'm here in DC. I'm about to go to a couple of hearings and panels with Refugees International and Amnesty International tomorrow, and we're not stopping. It was the first time that I had flown. I am now a green card holder, but I'm not a U.S. citizen, and I'm not going to lie to you. Getting on that airport was panic-inducing because I know I've been followed. But I don't know what else to do when you don't see your mom and dad for 2 months because they're in hiding. You just do what you can for those who don't and who don't have a voice. And so I'm here, going to be joining with a lot of leaders. And then from here, we fly to Selma. Let's remember that all of this is civil rights. All of this is human rights. Why Selma? Because this Sunday is the 61st anniversary of Bloody Sunday. So we're going to be marching on Selma on Sunday so we can bring together the immigrant rights movement with the civil rights movement, because at the end of the day, all of this is human dignity. We're not asking for anything else but human dignity, and to finally fix our broken immigration systems that are outdated, that are cruel, that separate families and punish those who have been here for decades.
And many people listening will be incredibly moved to hear of the work that all of you are doing. What support do you need? What can people in other communities who haven't yet been affected in the way that you have been do to support you?
I think it's important. We a lot of us here get this question all the time. From friends all over the world, who do we send money to? Please send money to groups like Edwin's, the Immigrant Defense Network. They are doing incredible work, and you can see the passion and hear the true love that exists in groups like that. There's groups all over the city. And I think the best way for you to help is to find people that are working in these areas and find ways that you can contribute. There's GoFundMe's, there's all kinds of ways to do it. For example, right now, I've been able to raise money through donations for the 3,000 yard signs that I printed on my own with the GoFundMe that I started, and I also got donations from that. And I've been supporting. I don't really want to say for obvious reasons, but I've been supporting people through the generosity of other people, and that feels incredibly gratifying. I still have other things that are available through my websites. I have some stamps that I've made from this that I'm hoping people will buy, that I will funnel that money to the right places in the way that my colleague Anne and Edwin were talking about, where it goes directly and without any hurdles. But it's not over here, and as Edwin and Anne have said so eloquently, we still need help, and we need the world to know that this is happening.
Marianne, Edwin just used the word love, and I think Eric used the word love as well, and that brings me to compassion and the huge compassion that is being shown here and the power of compassion. And I wondered if you wanted to talk to that, as you're from the Charter for Compassion.
I think that all around us, we're seeing structures crumble. And I would say that the phoenix that's rising is community, is humanity. And so much suffering, so many awful things, and yet we respond with kindness, with love for neighbors, with reaching out and with giving. And that really is who we are. So this is a time when people are really stepping into the very nature of who we are as human, by showing up in the community with kindness and support. I would like to know, there's so many questions in and beautiful comments in the chat. How do people follow this and know that they're getting, are there some ways that people can get involved and that people can duplicate this in their own community? Edwin, you gave so many good examples of it takes a whole community. It takes everybody. And it's decentralized leadership, isn't it?
And I had a question following on from that, which is, are you facing opposition? Because I mean, it's so powerful, and all one can do is just be in complete awe of what you're doing. But are you meeting resistance in the community? How widespread is the support that you're sharing?
I will say this. We're still in the process of assessing everything, but I believe it was Star Tribune, which is our major paper, give out a poll a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, that something like 58% of Minnesotans are with us. And as someone who's been fighting for immigrant rights and for undocumented people, we know that overwhelmingly people want to fix the system. And now, really, and I'll say this at our nation's capital, the only opposition we really have is the willpower politically to fix this once and for all. Minnesotans are ready. Our neighbors are ready. Everywhere we go, people are ready to fix this wrong. Let's fix immigration reform. Let's get a pathway to citizenship. Let's bring an independent investigation to the abuses of federal agents in our communities. It is just what we need is the political willpower to do this. I think people are ready and they're fed up.
And Eric, I know you were talking earlier, we spoke before this recording happened, about the fact that the people who committed the most recent murders are still free. There have been no charges. How does justice fit in to this?
Yeah, that's the question we're all asking. We're being made aware that I believe that Hennepin County, which is the county that Minneapolis is part of, there are charges being filed. But the open question now is how far can a state like ours, but with brave people like Edwin leading the fight, I think we'll win this. How far we can go to capture these federal agents that are being held God knows where and have been hidden and have been exonerated, basically. It's unimaginable in this day and age that someone can gun somebody down in the street and not be detained somewhere or questioned or go through a procedure. And let alone the physical abuses that people have had to endure and are still enduring at the hands of the local sheriffs, etc. Most recently at the Whipple building, for example. So we are crying out for justice. There are people, thankfully, like Edwin out there fighting for it, and we're all clamoring for the same thing. And now it's a matter of time. I think there's something that we're all saying here that started very early. That we've had to believe that there will be justice at some point, because there's no other way to live with this constant terror and oppression of human beings. We are convinced that no human being is illegal, and there has to be justice for people who have been disappeared, quite literally kidnapped off the street, women, children, men, as Edwin said earlier, of any persuasion, right? So we have to believe there will be justice, because otherwise it's incredibly upsetting and worrisome. But I think that's the hope we all have, and that's the fight that we're committed to here.
And Anne, if I can just come to you for the final word, you'd never been involved in any kind of community activism before this happened. What have you learned, and what hope can you offer to those who are just horrified by what has been happening in your city and in your state?
Yeah, certainly not to this degree. I would just say that I'm so proud of Minnesota for, like, I've never felt more proud of living here before. And it gives me so much hope. And I know if we can do it, other places can too. And I think it's woken a lot of us up to things that we should, quite frankly, have been, we should have had our eyes open to, for a lot longer than just more recently. But I think a lot of us have motivation to keep this work going. And I think what Edwin said is, coming out of this, more than anything, I'm really moved by just the humanity of listening to someone, listening to what they need, big or small, taking care of each other. Sometimes all it is picking up food, getting an egg crate, dropping someone off. Like, that still matters today in this digital age that we live in. And like Edwin said, more than anything, like, believing, my immigrant neighbors, when they drove by a group of women standing on a street corner in negative 20-degree weather with, immigrants make our world better signs, burst out crying, because it was just a beautiful expression of support and belief that, they matter, and what's going on is important. And so I think if we can learn one thing from this, is that we're better when we all take care of each other in all sorts of ways, big and small.
a beautiful way to end this extraordinary conversation. Thank you all so much for taking time out and the important work you're doing to tell us and the wider community what is happening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.